I was dying, but no one told me that directly. It was like a dream, where reality is just a blur, like wet ink on a letter. I was lying on the cold tile floor of my bathroom, and outside the windows the morning was breaking through the thick tulle curtains. My heart was beating erratically. My body ached as if it were sinking into icy water. I felt that not only the air was gone, but the meaning itself from my fingers, from my lips, from my memory. It was dark at first, deaf, but then the sound came. Not a voice, but a noise, as if thousands of people are whispering the same word, but no one can understand it. I don't remember how I went there, in that direction. This was neither the place nor the time. It was in between. My name was Caroline. I was 61. I was a librarian, a widow, with 2 grown children living in different parts of the country. Everything in my life was ordinary, simple, like neatly arranged books in a catalog. I've never looked for mysticism. I wasn't interested in religion. But as I was dying, I felt like a child's book that someone had suddenly opened, and there was a new chapter written in an invisible hand. There was no light in front of me. There was no tunnel. Only silence, colossal and alive, as if the entire creation was holding its breath. And then I saw them. Not people. Not angels. These were the dead. Thousands, no millions. They moved like a single stream, in complete silence, but each separately. Everyone was busy. We didn't talk. They didn't suffer. They didn't smile. Someone was sorting the stones, stone by stone, into neat pyramids. Someone was scribbling words I didn't know with a pen on a piece of paper that disappears as soon as it's written. One man, I could see his face especially clearly, was constantly washing the same white cloth in clear water that reflected the sunless sky. What are they doing? I whispered, not knowing to whom. And then they answered me. Not by voice. A thought as deep as a cleft. They repeat. What they couldn't complete in their lifetime. What they did without meaning. Something that poisoned their souls. They continue. Because we couldn't stop. My stomach turned cold. The dead did not rest. They didn't sleep in silence. They worked as if caught in an eternal loop of their own actions. Someone was reading and tearing up the same book. Someone was building a tower out of ashes. Someone was just walking in circles, leaving footprints on the ground that wasn't there. And then I felt fear, real fear, such that it is impossible to express by shouting. What will I do? My fingers, even out there, were shaking. Because I knew, I also had my own incompleteness, my own repetitions, my own meaningless rituals. I sought peace among the dead, but it was reflected, and it stared at me, unblinking. I wasn't being led by anyone. I moved on my own. Or it seemed that she herself. The space I was in had no floor or sky. It wasn't gray. It was out of color, out of shape, out of the usual coordinates. It was as if the world had been painted and someone had wiped away all the paint, leaving only traces on the canvas. The dead were still around. In different corners, if these corners even existed. One by one, I saw their actions. Clear, rhythmic, like a mantra without words. And all of them were unable to stop. The old woman was pouring water from bowl to bowl. A man in an old-fashioned jacket was moving bags that contained nothing. The young woman was looking in the mirror, but it wasn't her face that was there. It was a blank space. And everything repeated itself. Without pause. Without a goal. Without hope. I wanted to turn away. Close your eyes. But there were no eyelids in this place. There was only a look, not mine, a look at me. That's when I realized someone was watching me. Out of form, out of body. Not alone. Several. Their presence didn't feel like a threat, but it wasn't a comfort either. These entities, the Watchers, as I later called them, were like fire under ice. They didn't move. But they knew. All. One of them, if she had a gender, began to approach without moving. The space itself raised it to my consciousness. And I heard. Everything that you called meaningless becomes eternal here. I didn't understand. Or maybe she didn't want to understand. What do you mean? The answer came instantly. Every action devoid of love becomes a knot. Nodes live longer than humans. When a person dies, he leaves the body, but the nodes remain. They draw the soul back. Repetition is not a punishment. This is a consequence. My mind couldn't stand it. I felt as if someone was slowly stretching a string inside me, and it was beginning to tremble. I remembered how I'd lived for years with a stubborn grudge against my sister, how I refused to forgive, choosing rightness over peace. I remembered closing the door on Sundays and pretending I wasn't home when the neighbors rang the bell. You already knew what you were doing. The soul always knows. But consciousness persuades. Consciousness is a weak advocate against eternity. And then I saw the watchers in the reflection of those who repeated. They were behind everyone. They weren't watching for punishment. And to become witnesses. The dead were not alone. Their actions were recorded like lines in a book. Not in letters. Not in numbers. And the meaning. Every movement of the soul left a trace, and every trace was read. I remembered writing in my diary when I was young, "If no one sees, it doesn't count." Then it seemed to me that hidden thoughts, hidden desires, internal petty anger safe. Invisible. But now I knew that nothing ever went away. The dead are not gone. They carried out the sentence that they wrote themselves. And I trembled, because I didn't know how many of my own knots were already ripe. How much did I leave behind incomplete, haughty, meaningless? The watcher drew very close, and she whispered, "You're still alive, but you're already confused. And now you will be shown what it will turn into." And space, it started to change. The word changing does not reflect what has happened. The world has not been transformed. He was naked. It was like lifting a veil, not from something external, but from reality itself. I felt as if the whole fabric of the world I lived in, time, distance, sounds, was just a curtain behind which the real was hidden. And that authentic was alive. A hall opened up in front of me, not an architectural one, not a built one. He was not a place, but a thought form that lived in another dimension. Huge, but without walls. Images floated inside him, clumps of states, like fragments of a dream frozen in the air. There I saw myself, not in the body. It was as if my inner self had been turned outwards. All my actions, fears, desires, hidden thoughts took shape. They intertwined, twisted, and collided. Some glowed with a soft glow. Others were clumps of ink that swelled from time to time. One of them was huge. It throbbed. It wrapped around me like a tentacle. I knew instinctively that it was a knot of guilt. Years of enmity, condemnation, and small renunciations of love. Not murder. Not cruelty. Simply refusal of heat, drop by drop. I fell in front of him. Not on your knees. There were no feet here. But my being recognized that it was a part of me. And then the watcher said, "You think hell is a place. But hell is a habit. The habit of choosing yourself over others. The habit of hiding. The habit of living without loving." I couldn't speak. There was no mouth, but a scream was pounding in his mind. What now? You got your chance. The dead you saw are not all condemned. Some are in progress. They work on themselves. Through repetition, through pain. But you're still on the edge. You're still in the body. You can untie it. The images swirled. I saw souls, thin, glowing lines returning to their bodies. Some of them are cracked. Some with new scars of light. But you have to choose between leaving or coming back. The node will not disappear. But you can understand it. And then it will weaken. I knew that if I chose to stay here now, I would become one of those who poured water. Repeats the movement. She spends an eternity correcting what she might have understood in life. But I could still go back. I said, "I'm not ready. I want to live. I want love for real." The watcher fell silent. But space responded. First in a whisper, then in a ringing tone. It was as if someone had struck a string that stretched across worlds. And then I failed. Not down. Not up. And back. I didn't wake up like I usually do after a dream. Not with heaviness. Not with simple self-awareness. But with a sense of pressure. In every cell. It was as if the soul, expanded to the limit, was trying to squeeze back into the tight leather shell. I was lying on the couch in my living room. The smell of mildew, the tea on the table, the light from the window, everything seemed absurdly mundane, and at the same time frighteningly real. The sensations of the body came down like an avalanche. Itching, weakness, heaviness of the eyelid. My heart was pounding. But that wasn't the worst part. The silence was even more frightening. Silence inside my head, where only an hour ago the voice of the beholder sounded, where rivers of souls flowed, where I saw eternity. Now the void. Dense, viscous. And that made me feel terrible that I'd forgotten everything. That the dream was just a delusion. That I made it up. But then I noticed the tracks. The first is a scar on the wrist, thin as a burn mark. I haven't seen him before. He wasn't sick. It just was like a seal. As a sign. I ran my finger over it, and a chill ran down my spine. The second was in my cat's gaze. He was sitting on the windowsill, looking at me differently from before. As if he recognized it. Like he saw something behind me. I don't believe in the mystique of pets, but I knew in that moment that he knew. And the third trace was in the mirror. I walked over, looking into the eyes of the woman I was. And for the first time I didn't know. There was me, but not quite. Something's gone. Or vice versa, something has arrived. His gaze deepened. My face was older, as if I'd lived a decade in those hours. And inside, a quiet call. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just was. Like a vibration in my chest. Like the call of a promise. You must remember. You must tell me. But to whom? I tried calling my friend. She said I was sick. That I left for a second. She joked. Well, you finally decided to sleep in the afternoon. I nodded and laughed. But the voice inside wasn't laughing. He was pushing. Then I went to the church. Small stone on the outskirts of the city. I haven't been there in 15 years. The attendant, an elderly African-American man with a kind voice, greeted me like an old acquaintance. I tried to tell her, but the words wouldn't come out. How do you tell them that the dead don't sleep? That their work is not finished? That they live in a state of endless reflection, reinterpretation, repair of their soul? I said, I was there. And it's not just light. This is a job. That all they study. But we don't listen. Alive, we are silent. He wasn't laughing. He nodded. You were given a look. And, therefore, an assignment. That word earned seemed to open the inner dam. I started to cry. Long. Without words. Not out of fear. Because I knew I didn't belong in this world the way I used to. The dreams were no longer dreams. They became a continuation. Every night, I went back there. Not completely, not in a flash of light or the noise of pipes. And as if on the edge. Through the veil. It was as if my subconscious mind had turned into a balcony from which to watch what was happening there. I started seeing the dead. They didn't look like ghosts from movies. They had no rags, no chains, no groans. They were busy. They were working. One of the first nights I saw a woman. Her face was as if it were made of molten ash, but her eyes were filled with endless sorrow and hard work. She was sitting at a table covered with scrolls. I wrote it. I rewrote it. I did laundry. I started all over again. Repeated it. And again. And again. I heard a voice that didn't speak through its mouth, but it penetrated my thoughts. These are her words that were not spoken. She's rewriting her truth. Until it's clean. Another scene, a man kneeling in front of a mirror. In the mirror, not him but someone else. He asked for forgiveness. But the voice said, he doesn't forgive himself. No one is judging him, except himself. And that's why it stuck. I asked, mentally, but aren't they saved? Is not hell for those who reject the light? And again the answer, without reproach, only the truth. Hell is not a place. This is an internal court. The most precise, the most severe. People started to recognize me. These souls. Some turned away. Others were getting closer. They were not clearly visible. They seemed to be in a haze. Their faces were changing, flowing like water. One boy, about 8 years old, came close. In his hands he held a scribbled book. I tried to talk to him. He replied, I remember screaming when I was drowning, and now I'm learning not to be afraid. It broke my heart to see how different this place was from what I had imagined. There were no angels in white, no choirs, no hell with fire. It was an endless process, as if each dead person was walking along an endless corridor of their actions, decisions, thoughts. What happens to the dead? I asked this question inside the dream, and a light appeared in response. The light was formless, without a center, and he didn't speak in a voice, but in a wash. They purify. They unravel. They're building a bridge, to avoid repeating it, so that later to be born cleaner, or stay light. But so far they are working. I woke up screaming, covered in sweat. On the clock, 3:33, just like last time. And before that, again and again. I sat on the bed, staring into the empty room and felt, I'm not alone. I didn't try to sleep that night. I was afraid. Not a dream, but where it might lead me. But the dream came anyway. Not as peace, but as repression. It was like stepping through a door that pulled me in. Without a will. Without the power to resist. I was there again. It was different now. There was no light. Not a boy. Not a woman with scrolls. No answers. There was only a corridor. Gray, endless. The walls are cold, like cement and ash. The floor reflected a dim light that didn't burn anywhere, but was present everywhere. The light wasn't warm. He was just showing it. As I walked, the walls breathed. Sometimes I heard moans. Sometimes I heard whispers. But most often silence. Not deaf, but as if watching. I could feel something moving near me. I didn't see it, but I knew. I walked past the open room. A man was sitting inside. Male adult. A blank stare, like a fish out of water. He was holding a photograph. There was a family on it. Wife, daughter. And next to it is a boy. But the boy's face was erased like an eraser. He kept repeating the same phrase, but his voice didn't reach my ears. I could hear it in my mind. I didn't admit it. I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize. My stomach clenched. I realized that I was looking at a father who had secretly rejected his son, robbing him of his love, not by killing but by destroying the meaning of its existence. After his death, he was not punished. He chose to live in this room, in eternal recognition of what he once rejected. I turned away. I walked on. The corridor was getting narrower, darker. Doors appeared, and black mist flowed out of them. They were shouting somewhere. They were laughing somewhere. But the laughter was not happy. It was mechanical, like someone was trying to pretend to be having fun. I went at one of the doors. Behind her, a woman, dressed in a bright dress, all in makeup. She was singing, but there was no music. Her movements were endlessly repetitive, like a jammed record. She danced, sang, and painted. She danced, sang, and painted. And there are mirrors on the walls. In each, it is the same, but older, without makeup, tearful, hidden. And I realized she created this circle herself, because I was afraid of being seen as it is. We build our prisons out of masks that we loved more than our own truth, said a voice behind me. I turned around and there was no one there. Only light, but not bright. He was watching. I didn't judge him. I didn't interfere. I just was. And then I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask all along. I'll be there too? The answer was silent, but so obvious that my heart stopped beating. You're already there. Whenever you lie to yourself. I woke up crying. The world felt more real and less safe at the same time. I realized that the dead are not waiting for us in the future. They're close by, and many of us are already with them. The next morning I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. There was something inside that held his tongue, as if the words would betray the forbidden. I walked around the house, heard the radio. The cat moved on the windowsill. Neighbors swore through the wall. Everything was the same as always, but nothing was real. Everything resembled deception. Background. Theater. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I felt that presence again, but it wasn't from outside. It came from inside me. When I closed my eyes, it was as if I had fallen into black water. Not terrible, not cold, just a deep one. I sank slowly, and then the voice. It was a whisper, but it seemed to speak all languages at once. What do the dead do, you ask? Yes, I asked. They're watching. Not like shadows. Like a footprint. As consequences. And I saw it. A courtroom-like chamber opened up before me, but not earthly. There were no walls, just columns that led up to infinity. The dead sat in circles. Everyone had a screen, not like a TV, but like a window into our reality. I've seen them watch more than just people. For resonances. For what they left behind. A woman with wrinkles on her forehead watched her daughter repeat the same mistakes she had made. She couldn't interfere. I just watched it. And every movement of her daughter was filled with pain, not physical, but karmic. It was as if guilt had become bone. A man clenching his fists. He was looking at the grandson who had stolen it. His eyes didn't judge. He just knew that it was the result of what he had taught himself. Once. Without words. Behavior. Energy. Doubts. The dead don't rest, said the voice. They reap. I froze. Reap what? What was sown? Not with money. Not by business. Inside. Thoughts. Wishes. Lies that have been hidden, they grow and feed those who are gone. I felt someone's breath next to me. I didn't open my eyes for fear of what I might see. But I knew. There's someone in the room. Not sinister. Not light. Just watching. He didn't leave. He stayed. He was following me because he was tied up. Not a relative. Not familiar. Someone whose actions had touched my life, and now my life was touching his fate. We are interdependent. The dead are not out there. They're here. This is not a reward. And not a punishment. This is the law. When I opened my eyes, the cat had left the windowsill. The radio was silent. And the shadow in the corner of the room disappeared. But I knew she hadn't left. It just became invisible. I didn't sleep again that night. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't have the right to. I began to hear what had seemed like silence before. The rustle of thoughts, the imprint of emotions echoing down the walls. I didn't feel alone but watched. It was like a background, like a radio between stations, where snatches of other people's prayers and regrets break through. I closed my eyes again, and then threw up. I do not know if my consciousness was leaving my body or if it was an illusion, but the room was replaced by a misty plain. The ground beneath his feet breathed like skin, like something alive. Overhead, the sky is the color of blood, sunset, and iron. In front of me is a round dance. People. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. They went around in circles, endlessly, silently, in broken movements. Their faces are not old, not young. As if beyond the age limit. The eyes are closed, the mouths are slightly open, and the whole body is in a trance. I stood there, unable to move. My chest felt heavy, like I was wearing a concrete shirt. A woman appeared beside him. It wasn't made of flesh, rather from memory. She was dressed in white, but everything around her was black. Are they dead? Not exactly, she said. She pointed to one of them, a tall man with a blank stare and a hunched back. He died in the body, but it lives in actions. The thousands of children he once humiliated now carry his voice. He speaks through them. He's in them. And now, as long as his words live on, he can't leave. Is this hell? The woman looked at me. Sadly, this is the consequence. I saw my father enter the dance. I didn't know he was dead, but his face was blank. He was holding a box, I knew it. It was the box in which he kept my mother's letters. He always said he burned them, but he didn't burn it. He carried regret with him, the unspeakable truth. And now, even in death, he continued to pretend that he had forgotten. The round dance was a theater of oblivion, where souls spun in eternal rituals of what they hadn't finished. Every move is the same over and over, until someone alive recognizes what they've left behind. The woman whispered. The living and the dead are connected by pain. Who refuses to heal prolongs the round dance. Am I wearing it too? She was silent, but I already knew the answer. When I woke up, which is because I didn't come back, my hands were shaking, as if I were holding something fragile but invisible. The world around us has become thinner. The air is like a cloth about to tear. People are like reflections, slightly blurred, as if someone was looking at them through a layer of water. Everything looked familiar, but everything sounded different. People I knew, friends, co-workers, even the cashier at the store gave off vibrations that I could feel on my skin. Some sounded like glass, some like paper, and some like a broken instrument. And all of them did not know that they were walking in a circle, like those who were in a round dance. I knew they were dead too. Not the body. In solutions. In refusing to change. Their souls followed their learned routes like trams without a driver. And the more I looked, the more often I saw small marks on their actions, fragments of the choices they made. Or they didn't. I saw a man who cheated on his wife 20 years ago. He was feeding pigeons in the park. It would seem that this is terrible? But next to him, the shadow of the woman he'd abandoned flickered. She wasn't a ghost. She was an echo of his memory, and every time he closed his eyes, she came closer. In this world, I began to feel like an evidence collector. I realized that I couldn't just walk away from what I saw. It was my duty. I had to find what the dead had left behind, and give it to the living. And then I realized that my father was still there. It was in those letters that I once found, but did not read. A yellowed envelope in his desk drawer. I opened it that night. The letter was handwritten. There was one line in it. I was afraid of your mother because she was purer than me. I didn't betray her, but the light she carried. I'm sorry. Forgive the light in me. I was sobbing. Not as a daughter, not as a woman. Like someone who found a piece of her soul trapped in a piece of paper. And when I went back to sleep, I didn't throw up. I went myself. Quite calm. It was like going to someone I'd known for a long time. The dance was still going on. But now my father wasn't in it. I saw him standing on the edge, looking at me. Easy calm. And then he turns and walks out into the light, without fear. The woman in white was nearby. She didn't say a word. She just put her hand on my shoulder. You understand. But it's just getting started. I do not know how many days have passed since my return. The sun was rising as before, but it seemed to be doing so out of habit. The world was no longer the background. It was the text I was learning to read. I was sitting by the window with a cup of cold coffee. People passed by without noticing me. Someone was laughing, someone was talking on the phone. They were alive. Yet I sensed something strange about them, as if their bodies were alive and their spirits were floating beside me, bound together by a thin thread of fear. Not death, but what comes after. Sometimes I heard sounds that shouldn't have been there, a soft chorus in the distance, like a song under the ground. Sometimes footsteps in empty rooms. And one day, when I was passing by a mirror, I saw not my own reflection, but the eyes of a woman in white. You can hear us, she said. Which means you're one of the few. I was silent for a long time. And yet she asked, Who are you? She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a cloth bundle. Inside was a book. The old one. Battered. Untitled. On the first page, only one phrase. What the dead do depends on what the living do. I realized that the dead don't just rest. They're waiting. They work. They are being cleared. They're watching. Some continue to suffer. But the worst part is that some people stay among us, not knowing that they are dead. I started to see it more and more often. There are women in the crowd, dressed out of time, looking at nothing. Men whose lips move, but no one hears the words. Children running on the pavement, their footsteps not heard by the earth. These were the ones who were not released. Not because God is cruel, but because people have forgotten that memory is a door, not a cage. I began to write it down. Your dreams. Your visions. Their conversations with those who were no longer there. Sometimes I heard whispers in my sleep. Sometimes I saw silhouettes at the edge of the bed. But I wasn't afraid. The fear was gone the day I realized that the dead were not strangers. They are our mirrors. And then one day, in the middle of the day, when I was writing another page, I felt everything freeze. The room became silent. Even the clock stopped. And then he appeared. Not the Jesus they draw in books. Not a shining prophet. It's the one I recognized in my soul. His eyes were not made of light, but of a depth that has no bottom. But it wasn't an abyss of despair. It was an abyss of knowledge. Peace without borders. He said, "It's not your time yet, but you can choose. Stay or come back to me." I was trembling. I wanted to leave. I'm tired of the silence, of being misunderstood, from the fact that the living turned away when I told the truth. What should I do? I whispered. He came closer. His voice didn't come out. It lived in me. "Tell me, but not in words. Live so that your every shadow speaks of light." I opened my eyes. The world began to move again. The clock was ticking. The neighbors were noisy. And I understood I'll stay. Not to argue. Not to save you. But to be a witness. Between worlds. Between life and that which is not called death, but which is closer than we think. From this day forward, I'm not afraid of silence. Because I know that the dead breathe in it. And who knows, maybe right now while you're reading this, someone is looking through you. Waiting for you to remember. Not theirs. Myself. But only this story.